First of all, you'll notice this huge gender imbalance.
Not there.
Not there, here. Not what we expected, not what we planned for. One of us, her train is delayed. She's going to be coming in any time. Professor Susanna Hecht. She's going to be coming in any time. Unfortunately, Rohini Nelakini from India had to pull off because she had a small accident, and she had to call off. So she'll be joining not this event, but the rest of our discussions virtually. And so thank you. I know you guys have lots and lots of people coming through Paris, coming through Sciences Po. But because who wouldn't want to come and speak at PSIA, one of the leading schools of international affairs globally? So thank you again. So what I'll do is first have my colleagues introduce themselves briefly, a couple of minutes each, and then I'll give a brief background on what is it that brought this group of people together on the focus on climate action. And again, not so much on the what, but about how to go about climate action. And then each one of them will be kind of speaking about, from their point of view, what is it that they see as having traction? What are some thoughts? We're not going to be talking specifically about what are our key 5-6 points, because that is still being debated within the larger group. And that you'll see when the report comes out in about kind of a month's time. All right. So now I'm Shiv Someshwar. I used to be here full-time for a couple of years. I used to hold the European Chair for Sustainable Development and Climate. And then I thought that what I should really be doing is opening up a development clinic. I come from India, so now I'm in the process of opening up a development clinic. Just like doctors go to a clinic, the idea is to to kind of work with cities, states in the global south about what are some of the issues of development, and not offer solutions, because there are too many solutions out there, but really in a participatory way to kind of unpack issues of development. So before coming to Sciences Po, I used to be at Columbia University for a couple of decades at the Earth Institute. And then before that, I've done a bunch of stuff before that. Not your traditional academic. I used to be in a foundation, then I worked in the World Bank. But anyway, it's always been kind of exciting working on more of the applied development problem issues. I have a PhD in politics of deforestation, looking at institutions and the way they function and they don't function. And way back when, before most of you were born, I used to be an architect. But that's of kind of a historic nature now. So with that, now we have Naresh Singh.
Right, thanks, Shiv. I have just joined, in a way, full-time academic work at the university in India. It's called the O.P. Jindal Global University, where I'm a professor and vice dean of the School of Government and Public Policy. Prior to that, I served in the United Nations Development Program out of New York. Largely, my role there was as principal advisor on poverty and sustainable livelihoods. And then after that, I spent some time in the federal government of Canada. I'm Canadian, but now living in India. And in the federal government, I was a director general in the policy branch. So my work has largely been in public policy related to sustainable development and climate change. Started working in climate change in 1990, really long time. At the Second World Climate Conference, when they were just beginning to talk about climate change. So I've been there for a very long time, and it's been very frustrating, and I'm sure we will talk about that. And even prior to that, I was in the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Canada, where we looked at how do you talk about poverty and environmental conservation in the same breath. So I've done a bunch of other related things, been publishing stuff and so on. And today I'm delighted to be here at this world-class school, as I understand it. And so I'm looking forward to world-class questions when we come to the discussion.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Glenn Denning. As it says up there on the screen, I am from Australia. I have My main work, field of work is agriculture, rural development, food security. I'm currently a professor of practice at SIPA, which a few of you would have heard of, the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University in New York. I've been there for the last 13 years. So I'm a kind of, I'm relatively recently an academic, even though 13 years probably sounds a long time to most of you. But I'd previously spent around 30 years in the field. I have worked in mostly in Asia and Africa. I spent some time with the International Rice Research Institute, which was involved in developing new technologies and promoting improvements in rice productivity throughout the world, but mainly in Asia. Also worked in Africa, out of Kenya, with the World Agroforestry Center, incorporating trees into farming systems. In both of those settings, of course, the relationship between agriculture and food security and climate were inescapable. It's what farmers face day in and day out, every year, every season. So very much interested in how agriculture not only has to adapt to a new climate, but also how agriculture and the food system more broadly can contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change. And we'll be happy to talk about that in a few minutes.
Yep.
Good evening. So I'm the local guy now at this table. I'm Sébastien Treyer. I'm the Executive Director of IDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, the think tank based at Sciences Po Paris working on international environmental negotiations. And I think what I would like to say is that the basic work that we try to do at IDRI for the 20 years that we exist is to try and propose solutions to the collective action problem of intergovernmental action. How could individual countries that are mainly interested in their self-interest find ways to cooperate with others on issues like climate change? And a lot of what we do is to try to enrich that negotiation to find solutions to a zero-sum game that is else not going to, if you look at the only lens of self-interest, is not going to find a solution. I mean, we've been discussing with your colleague at Columbia, Scott Barrett, for years, where he said the climate problem is not solvable. I've done my math in the game theory. There is no solution at that. And so what we try to do is to say, well, there are process issues, there are other issues than just the interest. And so that's, I'm just already relating to the very interesting angle that Shiv has been proposing for this task force. And I think that's what we try to do. I think it's also particularly important in this geopolitical context now that we see countries still negotiating in the multilateral context. Lots of very interesting sustainability negotiations still ongoing or proliferating on an IPCC of chemicals, treaty on plastics. So even the countries that are fighting in the field are actually agreeing to negotiate on that. So that's quite interesting. But I think we need to be much more precise in what is actually the interest that different nations pursue, and in particular, we're working at IDRI on the European Union. And not to say that we like the European Union better than the others. It's just that we're based.
Which you do, but that's not the point.
No, I do like the European project as such. I mean, this supranational idea is wonderful. Then the EU has their own self-interest and their cynical strategies as any other country, but we are based in the EU, so we can try and push them in a particular direction and try to see how they can. They, for instance, have proclaimed that the EU wants to have an equal partnership with Africa, and of course, it's so asymmetrical that it's not a partnership of equal. Yeah. But what can we do to make it more equal, and how that relates to our discussion tonight is going to be extremely important. Last thing I want to say is that before joining IDRI, I was a civil servant in the Ministry for the Environment in France. I've been also in research, but one of the key things I try to do is how we discuss about the future might be a way to also find solutions for short-term interests that do not find a common ground. And so that's sometimes it's really, when you talk about scenarios of the future, you think it's just never going to have any impact on short-term action that is just driven by power relations. But I'm a utopian in that direction, believing that discussing the future is opening up doors for solutions.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks, Sebastian. So now we have a sense. Sorry again for the gender imbalance. We are hoping Susanna will get here quickly. And she's a force of nature, and she's going to take care of the balance. I'm always asked, why a task force, for heaven's sake? Another task force on climate? The world is littered with reports. Why another report, right? And perfectly reasonable question. So I'm just going to read out, and what I'm going to do is kind of present the bigger picture, the background to kind of why, over the past year, this group of extremely eclectic, independent people have agreed to come together. We're not paid, completely pro bono, and we're hoping that our ideas would work. We're not after fame and glory. We just want to make sure that there is at least some possibility of some sense in international negotiations. So, as we see it, the royal we, have failed to apply in policies what the science of climate change and its impacts is telling us and has been telling us for a while. While science has steadily accrued knowledge, and many of you have seen IPCC reports that is built on thousands of most excellent work done by thousands of scientists, papers, reports, it's all peer-reviewed. Science has been kind of accumulating on the dangers to the environment. It bests on issues of biodiversity. Climate is IPCC. These dangers coming from economic pathways, economic activities based on fossil fuel use, and as well as over-extraction of natural resources, while science has been kind of steadily raising kind of the drumbeat and telling us about the dangers of anthropogenic forcing and so on. Policy and decision makers, so not just policy makers, elected officials, bureaucrats, technocrats, but also decision makers in the private realm, in companies, in the public and private spheres, despite the promises, we can say in terms of action, have willfully continued to adhere to traditional economic growth orthodoxies. And I use the term orthodoxies in the plural, because there's a lot of good literature that says, oh, we need to bring about the end of capitalism as we know it and so on. But it's important to stress the plurality of actions that are going on. It's not just, for example, North Atlantic style capitalism, North Atlantic corporate capitalism, or entrepreneurial capitalism. It's the same with welfare capitalism, same with socialism, or mixed approaches, state-guided. All of these are leading towards a certain inexorable kind of greenhouse gas emissions. The response from civil society on the other side, especially youth and indigenous groups, has been to actively seek to change the course of growth, if not actually to stop growth. Many in Europe are part of this kind of degrowth movement, and it makes, I think, a great deal of sense in societies which has a very high level of consumption. Their guiding principle for policymakers and decision makers, for the most part, is one of altruism, that to act on the interest of people other than themselves. Greta Thunberg and all of them talk about intergenerational equity. What about the poor in developing countries who are now bearing the burden of vulnerability and kind of who are kind of have enhanced risk because of climate actions of the few? So the interest of others in the current generation as well as future generations. And a lot of us agree that's the correct way to look at our predicament. Focusing on one's own interest, whether it's a family, household, city, country, or a region, has led us to this rather kind of dire situation. So the predicament of a tragedy of commons, unfortunately, there is no indication in the past 30 years that the guiding principle of altruism actually has practical potential. Knowledge brokers, on the other hand, we include many of us, economists, sociologists, on the other hand, have kind of insisted that there are ways to resolve this issue. You need to kind of either price carbon, cap and trade, carbon tax. There's a way to internalize the externalities. And again, this has been an extremely robust discussion, but there is, 20 years later, there is no global carbon tax. There are some bright spots. ETS is one, European trading system. China is now beginning to have its own from following the last 7 kind of regional ETS they had. But many countries, if you look at the US, it's only in the two coasts. Many of the countries are nowhere close. So we're nowhere close to this very simple solution, just tax carbon, just tax externality. The question is, how come it's not being adopted widely? GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, have continued to soar on the one hand, as have the marches, conferences, and anguished statements on the other. Many of you, I'm sure, are part of Fridays for the Future, Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement in the US, and so many more indigenous and youth-led movements that we don't even hear about in the rest of the world, right? That's where the task force comes in. A group of eclectic individuals coming to answer the question, turning this issue of self-interest on its head. Our kind of central question, central issue that we are trying to examine from different points of view is, could self-interest, enlightened by knowledge of the dangers of climate change to oneself, be a better guiding principle for policies and decisions? This is, could self-interest, in the sense of understanding the dangers to oneself. Here we're not talking of altruism. We're not talking about you need to do good for the people in Maldives, or you need to do good for someone in the next generation who's not yet born, right? So this is about your own self-interest, but defined in a way through science, through the knowledge of what it is doing to yourself, what it's doing to others, who in turn then will impact on you. So the group has met several times, 4 or 5 times. We had a number of meetings, and I'm really happy to say virtually. So as far as the task force goes, our greenhouse gas emission has been 0 in terms of meeting. Well, of course, as high consuming, we're all part of high consuming society. I'm sure we have carbon footprint is not inconsiderable. But as for the meetings, it's only been virtual. And for the first time, we are meeting here, but again, in the true spirit, many of us are still going to be having this as a virtual meeting. So in the task force report, we'll examine the application of the principle of what we call as climate-enlightened self-interest to diverse issues and sectors and across spatial scales, where the task force members have deep expertise. And it's finite. There are many, many problems we're not going to be tackling. And by diverse, we mean really a wide variety, from universal food security and global banking to energy decarbonization of regions and countries, to situations where the state is absent or is corrupt, what it means for the EU to lead the world on climate. What is this issue of what is self-interest really boiled down to? That we have systems in place now that have, in fact, we are asked to kind of, and not just in kind of home economics systems where you kind of focus on your rational self-interest, but in all systems, the idea is that you maximize your utility, right? So the task force is finalizing its report over the coming weeks, and for a planned submission to diverse audiences. One of the audiences is G20, for a meeting that's coming up in later this year in Bali in Indonesia. But also we want to kind of actually have kind of multiplicity of audience for, I think what we are now looking into is a slightly different idea of how to get at the global climate good through this issue of kind of climate action. So with that, I'll stop now, and I'll have each one of my colleagues kind of talk about what they find interesting or not, and what are some of their thoughts on these issues of how to kind of actually get to climate action. What we are not proposing to do is identify the what, such as carbon sequestration here, REDD pilots here, or scaling up. REDD is reduced emission from deforestation and forest degradation there. So a lot of the what is already known. There has been hundreds of solutions that are being presented continually. So the focus is not so much on the what, but on the how. How do you kind of actually get this done? A simple thing like carbon tax. Why are we having such a big problem in applying carbon tax? If it is going to be saving, according to Stern and others, if it's going to be kind of actually be able to make money as well as save the planet, hey, people should be the first ones to kind of rush in to do it, right? But it still is not. There's a whole lot of political economy issues and all going on. So that's what our kind of very broad brush kind of statement of intent is. And now in this order we'll go. Naresh?
Well, thanks again, Shiv. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I work in a school of government and public policy. So what I am trying to do is to bring attention to some of the things that are the fundamental things that need to be fixed in order that many of the things like the what that Shiv is talking about, why are these things not working? And so let me go through a few points. The first big point that I would like to make is, in fact, where Sébastien left off. Like one colleague he mentioned, have figured out that we can't solve the climate problem because he's done his calculations using game theory and it can be solved. Well, I'm kind of happy to hear that because the classic game theory that we teach in economics courses is based on maximizing self-interest, right? Maximizing utility, and then it makes all the assumptions of neoclassical economics in order that the math might work. And all those assumptions make economics, as you know, many of you would be economics majors maybe, you would know that what it does is it makes economics divorced from the real world, so to speak. So what do we do? But game theory is important. So what I would argue is, some of my colleagues in the center that I run, it's called the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. I'll make the links to those things.
There, take that.
Big complicated things, just like climate change. The first thing is, I have colleagues who are now looking at moving from classical game theory into looking at infinite games. Fundamental shift in the theoretical frame. But when I look carefully at what they're doing, they are repeating finite games and running it in an infinite manner. So what I've asked them to do is to stop playing games which one must either win or lose. And what about if we played a game that we play in order to continue playing? That's the question. If we continue to ask how to win or lose the game, which is the basis of Prisoner's Dilemma and all the other stories you've heard about, I think we're wasting time. We will not get to answer the other big question that we must answer related to power. If we cannot reconceptualize power so that power can be made into a positive sum game, then again we will lose. So the question then becomes, how can power become a positive sum game? That is to say, you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. And you don't have to lose for me to win. That's what it essentially means. What are the conditions and what is the context and what are the incentives through which we can have these so-called win-win? So that's the other thing we need to re-examine, linked to this whole shift in the way we play games. Let me then move to what's wrong and what we need to rethink about probabilities. So most of the analysis that is done, and most of the analysis that you will do, in order to model reality, whether it's a public policy problem of whatever kind, climate change, species extinction, deforestation, economic inequalities, and so on, and the list goes on. All the 17 SDGs are all examples, one might say, of wicked policy problems. And you know wicked policy problems, right? Horst Weber and his co-author wrote on wicked problems in 1973, which were problems that had no apparent or immediate solution. In fact, when you tried to solve one aspect of it, another part became worse. And that's the kind of problems we are dealing with. So how do you deal with this stuff? I would argue that these probabilities and optimization models that we have been using are based on an underlying assumption which is false. And that underlying assumption is that the relationship that we are working with remains stationary. That is to say that the baseline is not shifting. So when you have a situation in which you have uncertainty, which is not related to randomness nor to lack of information, is it a bit loud or no? It's okay?
Keep going.
Yeah, okay. You hear it clearly. So if we have a situation in which you have uncertainty that you have to make public policy in the face of uncertainty, and the uncertainty is not epistemological, that is, it's not a matter of lack of information, nor is it due to randomness, but it is due to ontological uncertainty. It is a part of the system because the system changes every time you make policy. And that we have to deal with in a different way. Climate change is like that. But we continue to be making more and more recommendations that are based on this continuing kind of, if you like, erroneous underlying framework in which we think we know the cause-effect relationships. Now let's talk a quick 30 seconds on cause-effect relationships. So climate change that we observe are the symptoms, right? You know, the temperature increases and extreme weather events and all of these issues that come from the actual physical climate change. And then we have all these other risks which are associated with governments trying to intervene. So you try to move to a low carbon economy and you end up with another set of risks called transition risks. And these physical and transition risks interact with each other. Makes it really complex. But we continue to use assumptions based on direct cause-effect relationships. And we confuse complicated with complex. So complicated are problems which are physical in nature, in which the underlying cause-effect relationship remains the same. Complex relationships, on the other hand, change with the intervention. The system is constantly adapting, co-evolving, and shifting to different kinds of scenarios. And we know how to work with those systems, accepting that we are not doing it in climate change as much as we should. So complex adaptive systems thinking is an alternative way that I am advocating for us to begin to understand how to deal with these problems. The final point I want to make is on what I called applied spirituality and public policy. So we are talking of enlightened self-interest. So that sounds a little bit like a word you might have heard before called enlightenment. Now, I'm not talking about the 17th century Enlightenment revolution right now. That's important as well, but that has led to some of the problems we have now. The Newtonian, Descartes, Voltaire, that revolution gave us so much confidence in technical rationality that we have forgotten how to reason. In fact, Einstein, who we should always quote on these occasions, I guess, because everybody agrees most of the time with what he says. He says the problem with humans is that we have been given a faithful servant called the rational mind. And we have been given a sacred gift called the intuitive mind. And all of that is fine so far. But the problem begins when the servant, the rational mind, has dominated our society and the sacred gift has been forgotten. Well, we are taking a hard look at what that sacred gift is. It is figuring out who you are. Who am I? And the argument is very simply that most humans have no idea who they are. And I would argue that 99.9% in this audience, I would argue, unlikely to have asked the question, who am I? And to go a little bit deeper, I know you've asked the question, who am I? but go a little deeper than that, and then figure out I'm not this or I'm not that. I'm not the body that you know, and you're not your thoughts or your feelings. And then you go to a place that is quite interesting. And that place is the place from which I believe public policy can be made in an alternative way. So coming back, and let me close on the climate change link. So greenhouse gases cause climate change. Greenhouse gases come from burning fossil fuel. And it comes really from burning more and more fossil fuel than we actually need to burn right now, but then we need to phase that out completely, right? And if you ask yourself, why is it that humans continue to consume more than they need, to completely confuse want with need, you end up at the same place that you end up when you ask yourself, who am I? And that is well, let me just end with the question, are humans greedy? Are humans by nature greedy or not? So I ask my students that question, and normally all of them will say, yes, humans are greedy by nature. So I'm asking you that question, and you probably can answer that later on when we have the discussion. And I used to believe that humans were greedy by nature as well. Now I've come to the conclusion that humans are only greedy by nature when they do not know their true nature. And that's the link, that's the underlying link, I believe, through which we will have enlightened self-interest at work for addressing the climate problem. Now, I can make the link and I can show you how this is linked to public policy in the real world, but I leave that for later.
Thank you, Naresh. Glenn?
Okay. Can you hear me at the back? It's clear. Yeah? Okay. So I will maybe, I don't know, bring us back to earth, literally. But also we'll return to those issues, and hopefully I can make some connections to these excellent points that you made, Naresh. You mentioned the role of fossil fuels and, of course, well-known contributions of our energy systems to climate change. But just to remind everybody, the facts, about a third of all anthropogenic greenhouse gases come from our food system, okay? It comes from what we produce, what we consume, what we waste. And that's why I'm here, I think, and I'm very interested in the connections between agriculture, food systems, and climate change. Now, the connection between our food system and climate is, it should be obvious. All of our food systems around the planet, no matter where you go, what you see and ultimately what people consume is very much influenced by climate. It's influenced by other factors as well, soil and landscape and the like, and culture and personal preferences. But there's a limitation of what you can do, what you can produce, and what you can make available for consumption based on the climate. And so the inescapable fact is, if the climate changes, so must our food systems, and so must our consumption patterns. And we're moving from this relative calm that we're right at the end of this period known as the Holocene, 10,000 plus years of what you might call climatically congenial times, to the Anthropocene, where we're now seeing all manner of disruptions and disturbances to the food system. Obviously exacerbated by other factors. It's not the only factor involved in the sort of patterns that we're seeing today, but it's clearly very important. So our food systems are unquestionably vulnerable to climate change, but as I mentioned, are also major contributors and drivers of global warming and its impacts. And for the past several years, I've been trying to bring us back to the basics. What are we trying to achieve here on this planet? You know, we have 8 billion people, close to 8 billion. I don't know what the exact number is today, but I think we hit 8 billion sometime this year. About half of the world's population, close to 4 billion people, are in a sense malnourished. Either they're not eating enough or they're eating too much. It's actually more of the latter these days. 2.5 billion people are already in the overweight and obese category. It means they're not eating the right kinds of healthy diets, and often because actually, sometimes because they can afford, sometimes because they cannot afford healthy diets. So half of the world's population not eating a healthy, sustainable diet. At the same time, we're seeing land degradation, biodiversity loss, deforestation, and climate change. Now, an idea I've been articulating as what should be our goal is something I call universal food security. And that is where every person on the planet gets a healthy diet, not too little, not too much, a healthy diet based on sustainable food systems, sustainable agriculture, and distribution of that food. The good news, and this is from a technical standpoint, is that this is entirely achievable, even with the mess that we see around us today in terms of all of the challenges we have, that we basically have the know-how to be able to produce healthy diets for all people across the planet and to greatly reduce the impact that that is having on people. As Shiv said, we won't go into the technical details. In the Q&A, I can talk about 5 areas that I think can really make a difference there if undertaken in a coherent, coordinated, and context-specific setting. We can achieve this. But the question is, so why is it not happening? Okay? That we could be producing sustainably, consuming sustainably, and reducing our impact on the environment. The reason is that our food systems really depend on actions by multiple players. There's nobody in charge of the food system anywhere, basically, globally, nationally, and locally. It's not just the requirement, it's not just the role of governments. It's not just the role of farmers. It's not just the role of the business sector. It's not just the role of individuals, third sector organizations, and individuals like all of us here. We can do something, we can contribute something, but really it takes a whole of society in a coordinated, coherent manner, acting in a coordinated, coherent manner to bring about the changes. The challenge really is illustrated by this task force that we're on, is really as a result of this somewhat inconvenient truth, and that is that people act in self-interest. Within the food systems work, it's easier to, we normally differentiate adaptation and mitigation. So adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Appealing to self-interest is much easier for adaptation. Why? Because, okay, if we adapt, we will benefit from that. Mitigation is more challenging because in the long term, perhaps we will all benefit, but in the short term, mitigation sometimes and often involves giving up something today for the future. And that's often much easier for people like us with the privilege of being able to sit in this room than a small-scale maize producer in Malawi who is thinking about having enough food at the end of the season. Very interested in adaptation to climate change, not so interested in what this means in terms of carbon capture and mitigation of climate change. So therein lies a real challenge. And there's no question that what that means is there's a role for public policy. Somehow we need to collectively intervene in order to make decisions and guide us along pathways that will lead to a more sustainable outcome, particularly in this case, in terms of climate change. Now, how do we get to that point? Now, I have argued, and obviously I have some bias, especially in the past 13 years working at SIPA, working at Columbia, working with students, over 500 graduates of my MPA in development practice. My bias is towards the role of leadership, and particularly the role of development practitioners and practitioner leaders to actually bring about these kinds of changes. And that comes, I think it comes about as a result of this awareness that Naresh pointed out to us. Actually understanding where we all fit within this global food system, how we relate to our environment, not just how we control our environments, but how we relate to it. So I think universities are going to be absolutely critical in that regard, and I think the kinds of programs that you're all involved in are extremely important in producing agents of transformation, agents of enlightened self-interest, who I hope, us up on this front table here, we're depending on you basically to be able to permeate organizations, whether it be governments, international organizations, civil society organizations, the private sector, and acting in your own capacity, creating your own organizations perhaps, acting in ways that are truly in our collective self-interest. And by collective, I'm also thinking in terms of future generations. So food security, therefore, universal food security, is actually in everybody's self-interest. But it's going to take leadership, exceptional, enlightened, informed leadership to be able to make this a reality. And, you know, I think I'll leave you with this idea that leaders in this kind of a complicated setting are individuals who are prepared and can thrive in ambiguity and thrive in complexity. That's going to be key to the future. Let me stop there. Thank you.
I feel I have a tough job after these words of Naresh and Glenn, but while I was listening to Naresh, I think I wanted to mention something that is not obvious enough and that should be said. To my standards, one of the key examples of enlightened self-interest while thinking of climate action is the way the developing countries have accepted to sign up to the Paris Agreement. I could say it for India, I could say it for many African countries and the vulnerable countries. I remember talking to an African delegate at the COP21 in Paris, and he was saying, my self-interest is to continue asking for a share in the effort of mitigation that is on you guys who have the ecological debt of having put all these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. My self-interest is to say, to preserve the fact that I need to develop first and then you do the job and I have my share of the carbon budget. But I understand that the fairest of the deals that I can strike in climate negotiations is to accept that I anyway also have to do my share and to bet on collective effectiveness to protect my country, because my country, and I can't remember which country it was in Western Africa, is going to be completely destroyed if you fail to act and we fail to act collectively. And I think that's really something that is the way you defined it, Shiv, about self-interest, understanding the dangers to oneself. And that, I think, was extremely important and not really stressed enough at the negotiation at COP21. And actually, that spirit that these southern countries had is now not gone, but is really endangered by the fact that the world has changed and by the fact that the northern countries are. I mean, what is striking in the climate negotiation is the way the northern countries are not able to keep their promises of the $100 billion per year beginning by 2020 from financial transfers from northern countries to southern countries. And it's about not just ODA, public money, but also private money. But that is plateauing at 80 billion. But that's just, as many of the colleagues from Africa with whom I talk are saying, this is just a minor symptom of what is dysfunctional. What we hear from the colleagues with whom we discuss, climate specialists from Nigeria, like Chukwumere Okereke, he's saying we are now in a stage of globalization where the risk is that we are going to increase even more the asymmetry in the structure of the global economic system. And it's not just about the new the renewables economy, but the economy of renewables is contributing to that to some extent, putting back some of the countries that were going to emerge in terms of development into being the providers of raw materials for this green economy, for instance. And we have all these European discourses about relocalizing jobs for the industry and getting the jobs back, and what space is there for African countries in terms of this sounds really again like a zero-sum game, and so that's the context. In that context, ODA can do a little bit of jobs to be something between a reparation or a kind of a solidarity mechanism, but this is not at scale. What is at stake is actually, I hear from southern colleagues, and I'm sorry, I'm talking for them, so please, Shiv, you work in India, so you're better.
And I'm brown too, so
you can
I'm double.
You can understand. You can understand from. So I'm stop apologizing. I'm just saying what I hear. What is interesting is what they want is that we share the power in the global economic system. And so when we organized, and Shiv was, I was so happy to have you there. We celebrated Idris' 20th anniversary with a conference on where is global multilateralism going and how can green issues be a part of the next stage. The question we ended up with was, why would the powerful give up their power? Which is something I think, Naresh, you were mentioning. How can we factor in a discussion about power where power can become a positive sum game and not just a zero-sum game? So that's one point that I think is extremely important today, and that's the context. Where that is leading me is, and the way I intend to contribute to this task force, is to say, well, now it's a lot on the shoulders of the EU to be much clearer about its enlightened self-interest. It's not because the EU is one of the major donors, if you count the EU and the member states in terms of ODA, that it's selfless, altruistic. It's not because the EU is often the champion of more ambition in international negotiations that it's clear about, and it's self-interest. And I think that's where we are trying at Idris to try and discuss a little bit more what is the enlightened self-interest of the EU. First, it should really acknowledge much better that in the economy of the future, the EU is going to be highly dependent on Africa for many of the resources. And if it's stated like that, then we can begin a conversation about how that dependency can be not transformed into a new colonial way of imperialism in these countries, but rather in something where we acknowledge this dependency and the resources with much fairer share of the global supply chains that we are going to be building. And it's also very important that the EU is much clearer on its self-interest. So not saying that they do development for altruistic reasons, but really understand why is it that they want to cooperate with African countries. We, for instance, work on examples of the green hydrogen supply chain, where Namibia is betting to develop a lot of photovoltaics to produce hydrogen and export it to Germany and the EU that are starving for hydrogen for the future. But how can that not come at the expense of the industrialization of Namibia, of the fact that the hydrogen or the electricity should be first used for Namibia to develop and industrialize before exporting to Europe. And how can that be balanced in a way where the European Union players would understand that having more industrial jobs in this green hydrogen supply chain in Namibia or Southern Africa is actually in the interest of Europe, rather than trying to have all the jobs here. I mean, for instance, having the H2 exported to Europe and then produce green steel in Europe. We should actually produce green steel in Southern Africa. And the jobs that are going to be there are not the jobs that we will be able to have in Europe. So having that conversation about how we share power, value, jobs, the capacity to innovate in those global supply chains of the future is going to be extremely important. And there, for the moment, the only way I can argue, because I'm not, maybe I should, but I'm still using the material interests only as a way to convince the decision makers. I'm saying the material interest that you have, Europeans, is to have the African countries as allies in this geopolitical world of tomorrow. And then sharing power with them is better, because then they're going to be really allies and not just a supplétif. I don't know how to translate that horrible French word. You know, supplétif was the way that we had the colonial empire being the second order soldiers that were going to be in the war for France. And that's the way very often the Europeans are treating the delegates from Africa when they want to win something in the UN negotiations. We want Africa to be allies. That's why we need to share power with them. So that's a completely non-spiritual way to talk to them, but just saying the world is going to be tough. You want allies, so you need to share power with them. And that's, I think, the way, from my side, how I approach the fact that the self-interest, the enlightened self-interest of the northern countries is going to be extremely crucial if we are able to make that clearer, because that's really, we are really on the verge of losing the spirit of 2015, of the SDGs, of the Paris Agreement, where the southern countries actually made a lot of concessions, and I think we did not acknowledge that enough. I think probably we did not want to acknowledge that Prime Minister Modi was doing something good, because that was complicated to acknowledge also for other reasons. But that's something we need to acknowledge and see how we can build on that.
Yeah, thank you. So now you see, when I said eclectic members, I was not kidding. We come at it from very different points of view, and that was part of the reason why with Enrico Letta, we actually had these people have this amazing group come together. We didn't want a group of economists who would basically, even before you open their mouth, you know what they're going to say, or people who have been long involved with climate. And so the key strength is different ways of thinking. It's still an open-ended question whether certainly I can guarantee you it's not going to be one single message. No way, because I think the task force members will just walk out in disgust. It has to be multiple messages, but whether the audience for the multiple messages are ready or receptive, that's another issue for us. So with that, let's open it up for discussion. I'm still hoping, Susanna said that she's giving me minute by minute as her taxi approaches. And so Marie-Zanette has actually gone to meet her, so hopefully we'll have Susanna coming in any moment. But until then, why don't we have questions from the floor? And you could target the questions for anyone.
I'm going to circulate the microphone.
And don't be shy. Yeah.
There are two microphones, one on each side. You could just jump up and go to the microphone.
Oh, there are those microphones right there, right behind you.
Sebastian, there are microphones
Right
at the
there.
side.
It's in your self-interest to use the microphone.
Yep, you can speak into the microphone. No, Sebastian. Oh, okay. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, it is working. Firstly, thank you for coming to speak here today. It's been really interesting.
Loudly, like you were singing you're in an opera. You throw your voice.
I just wanted to ask Glenn to expand on those 5 areas where you think if we act in a coherent, context-specific way, we can make a real difference today.
What was the first part of it? What are
the 5 areas?
the 5 areas?
Yeah, the 5 areas.
Oh, okay. All right, I was glad somebody would ask that. So the 5 areas, number 1, sustainable intensification. All right? That seems like an oxymoron, that you can't intensify without actually destroying the environment, but the idea of increasing production and increasing productivity at the same time reducing the environmental footprint. Again, I can elaborate on that later, but again, I believe that's possible. And some of you are going to ask, well, why? Don't we produce enough food already to feed the planet? It's like saying we have enough water on the planet that nobody should go thirsty. But people go thirsty and people have a lack of water. So that we have to find ways. In some cases, we'll have to reduce agriculture altogether, and we'll have to offset that with increases. And we are moving from 8 billion to 10 billion by 2050, and people are changing their diets, all right? And it's going to put a lot of pressure on agriculture. So sustainable intensification. Number 2, market infrastructure. Essentially, how do we connect farmers' production more efficiently with consumers? And the idea there is that in some places we're generating surpluses that cannot even be distributed to places where people are in need. So transport infrastructure, electrification, communication technologies, you name it, blockchain, a lot of ways are out there where we can improve market infrastructure. The third is post-harvest stewardship. So managing what we produce much more efficiently and effectively. We waste approximately 1/3 of the food that is produced. It's either lost or wasted along the value chain from production through to the final consumer. There are all manner of ways, none of them really easy, but there are ways in which we can reduce the losses. The fourth is shifting to healthier diets. All right, so that's a big topic in itself, and emphasis on moving toward plant-based diets is an important part of all that. And that's, if you are interested in that, I think the Eat Lancet Commission report has a lot of useful insights on how that can be done without being totally pedantic and dogmatic about everybody needing to become vegetarians. Many of us need to greatly reduce our consumption of animal products. That's a key part of that. And the final part, number 5, is social protection. Because for all these other things that we do, there will always be people who are not in a position to achieve their own food security. And for them, there are a wide range of instruments that are possible whereby people can move towards that just right diet. In most cases, being able to afford healthy food or getting the essential nutrients, as in food assistance, the role of the World Food Programme and others is an important part of that set of interventions I call social protection. Now, these are 5 broad areas. There are other areas that are cross-cutting and important as well. And in every different context, New York City, where I live, will have a different balance of these 5 areas as, say, Malawi or the Philippines. All right, so they're very much context specific. So they're the 5 areas. For more, I'll refer you to my book called Universal Food Security, which will come out in February 2023.
Yay. Thanks. So now, in the interest of time, I'm going to take a few questions together, and then we'll have a go at it, okay? So now it's your turn. We'll kind of alternate. So now.
Perfect. I have a question for all of you. I think very fundamentally my question is about hope. So I think if I can kind of summarize what you said is that in many cases we know what to do, but for some reason we are not doing enough of what we should be doing. Mr. Singh, you talked about trying to convince people to play the game in order to continue playing the game. And Mr. Denning, you talked about enlightened leadership. Mr. Trey, you talked about collective effectiveness. So I think fundamentally my question is, how hopeful are you that you can convince people to start playing a different game, to start showing more enlightened leadership, to start emphasizing more collective effectiveness. And if it's not hope, then what else motivates you in your work?
Okay, thank you very much. Now here. Susanna. We have been waiting. So go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I have a question that kind of goes in the same line. So you were talking about how maybe using self-interest is a good way, or like a good tool for influencing decision makers. But what about when we reach the point where further action is not economically profitable but still necessary? Like, what do we do then? I feel like appealing to self-interest has a point where it will not be enough anymore, and And also linked to the leadership thing, what's the role of grassroots movements in what you're doing in your work? Yeah, thank you.
All right, maybe two more, one there, one there. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, first off, thank you so much for coming and talking to all of us. I guess I'm in the same vein of leadership. Right now, we're on a trajectory to pass the 1.5 degree tipping point that the IPCC has identified for us about where things really start to escalate in terms of climate change-related disasters, weather events, and so on and so forth. So once we pass that, and it's more of a when than if, I think, at this point. Once we pass that, what does leadership do? What does leadership look like in response to that? Do we continue and say, okay, well, next is to not go past 2 degrees? Or is it a way to signal that change in leadership is needed? Because people like David Malpass is in charge of the World Bank, and last week we saw a lot of people in leadership asking for his resignation, and he's a leader, the president of one of the foremost banks in the world. So, thank you.
One more. So I wanted to thank you as well for all these presentations. It was very insightful. My question was more for Glenn Denning, especially concerning sustainable agriculture, because I've done a bit of research on it, and I've seen that it was possible indeed, but under the conditions that you reduce animal food feed rations, you diminish animal production, you diminish food waste, that's 30% globally, and also you would need to adapt to the soil fertilizing thing, so you'd need more legumes to replace the pesticides and all of this. So you do need a lot of conditions to make it possible to feed the world on sustainable agriculture by 2050. And I was wondering, as you seem to be a firm believer of it, how do you intend on starting it, and how do you think we can actually start that? Because obviously it affects everyone and there's a lot of things to address. Thank you.
Okay, so what we'll do now is provide really kind of succinct answers to these excellent questions. I also want to make sure we have some time for Susanna, and she's going to be coming at it from left field, knowing Susanna, so it's going to be really interesting. So why don't we begin with some of the questions that were asked. Sebastian, Glenn, just succinct, short, 90 seconds, chop.
90 seconds about hope. I mean, that's really the question that we need to ask. So I don't have an answer. I can say that I'm fearing that the catastrophes that now every region is experiencing, we have now entered in the era where everybody knows what catastrophic climate change looks like, and I'm fearing that the leaders are actually more thinking about reactive crisis management than transformative action. I could quote our Minister for the Interior saying we need to have police for the incendiaries, which was his answer. I mean, And so I'm thinking that the wake-up call might not be a wake-up call. That's my first point. The other thing is I believe that what matters a lot with the tipping points being always transgressed, because there are many tipping points. 1.5 was kind of an average one, and the scientists are talking about a series of tipping points that we are crossing one after the other. I think what is extremely important is to really look at the very unequal social consequences of these catastrophic climate events, and to really try to position the political meaningfulness of those consequences, and to seek for mobilizing, for looking at that and not just at the catastrophes as such, but their unequal consequences. I think that's how I think I would position myself. For a moment, I was saying at Idris that I'm hopeful, but I'm also cynical. So I'm not sure we will succeed, but I still continue to mobilize as much as we can to try and come to the enlightened climate action that we could try and forge. But I understand it's not enough for your generation to say that, because I can't remember who was asking that. You were saying, what do we try to stop at 2 degrees, and then we try to stop at 3 degrees, and then I really see that, but I think we really need to emphasize a lot the social consequences to be able to stop, to have a political action. The catastrophe can be really demobilizing rather than mobilizing. And I stop there because I...
Thanks.
Let me quickly answer some of these, but provide a little context. When Sébastien spoke of the material side of negotiations between Africa and the European Union, I wanted to share a quick story with you. I was in the negotiations that led to the UN framework on climate, and we had a very strange situation. That time I was living in the small islands. The 37 small islands of the world were negotiating as a bloc. The United States came to me, the head of the delegation, and said, would you guys stop this negotiation tactic that you're using? What we are ready to do is to talk to you about ODA, about aid. We will resettle all the people of the small islands if the sea level is raised to the level that you can survive. We will resettle all of you to the United States. Just don't bother with these negotiations, because the United States, the lifestyle of Americans are not up for negotiation. That has never left my mind. Such a level of immorality, being put into negotiations meant that material negotiations were not going to work. And that shifted my whole mindset in the way we go forward. Having said that, how hopeful? I think the level of hope will change as the crisis unfolds. Unfortunately, we will lose a lot of people in that process. People will die, people will starve, assets will be destroyed, but the level of political will shift, and some of humanity will remain. But it's not looking good. That's my own gloomy answer, unfortunately, but I would prefer to be more accurate and gloomy than less accurate and hopeful. Self-interest and versus the grassroots question. I think we have to have a recognition that climate action has to be whole of society and not governments, including in the negotiations. And there are ways of doing this. Some countries do it better than others, but that's I think, enlightened self-interest, which is what we are grappling with, would be different from coming to a dead end when you can't meet self-interest anymore. And on the issue of leadership, when we had the first Rio conference in 1992, Maurice Strong, who was the chair of that conference, was asked, how many leaders attended this conference? And he said, well, I had nearly 100 heads of states attend, but I can't really answer how many leaders were there. And the point I really want to make is that political will doesn't come from political leaders. It comes from the electorate in in democratic countries. And it's really about people action getting leaders to be different.
It's impossible to answer those questions in 90 seconds.
No, you have 30 now.
30. So particularly the last one, which was I think a challenging one. But what I wanted to, first of all, in terms of hope, we can't wait for a miracle, all right? So we don't sit back and hope that there'll be some miracle solution, whether, as the last question raised, is it legumes? Is it, we just need to cut our food waste, or we need to shift to vegetable diets or whatever. So I'll just ask you to beware of some calls that you'll hear. And one of them is, and you'll hear people up the front of this room in other settings say, all we need to do is, and then you just fill in the blank, whatever that blank is.
Insects.
There's always that magical solution at the end of it all. I don't think it is that simple. The second thing to be reminded of, the starting point is now. The starting point is now. People say, people bemoan and criticize industrial agriculture and nasty Western diets and all of these things. Well, that's our starting point. So don't tell me we should live, we go back and live as cave persons, or that we all become subsistence farmers. It's not going to happen. The starting point is now. So how do we move from where we are now to improving our food systems? And the third thing I'd really implore you all to think about is, and it relates to this, is try to think of blended solutions that, again, not necessarily at one end of the scale or the other end of the scale, but how do we bring some of these things together? How can we make organic agriculture principles more profitable? How can we move industrial agriculture to be, less damaging to the environment and use inputs much more efficiently, rather than say, let's just dismiss any discussion of that and focus on this solution? Look at blended solutions. Again, urban agriculture, vertical farming, that's the solution, right? No, it's not. But is it potentially part of the solution? Yes. But we need to sort of think more holistically and openly about possibilities. I'll stop there. Thanks.
So now, in the interest of time, I'm going to give the floor to Susanna, because we have less than 10 minutes. Susanna, 3 minutes.
Well, as your representative from Fashion Week,
She's brought balance to this imbalanced
well, exactly. So
podium.
through my cab driver, we had a long chat. Anyway, first of all, one of the things I would like to do is talk to you quickly, and I know I have like 30 seconds or something. No, I'm getting 2 minutes, actually, which is the following, which is of the 5 major tipping points, only one of these is really inhabited, and I'm not going to go through the list. But Amazonia is one of the key tipping points. Antarctica is not inhabited, Greenland isn't inhabited, the AMOC is not inhabited. There's lots of things that are driving planetary change that are not inhabited by people. So one of the things that I guess I would say is that what we have in the Amazon actually is a sort of strange dynamic, which is that, first of all, you're in the world of without law, in a lawless land. This is the world of extraordinary clandestine economies, land grabbing, illegal timber, illegal gold, various kinds of infrastructure that's meant to just move things out. So one of the big problems is that under Jair Bolsonaro, what you had were systems that actually controlled deforestation, and this was seen as very good. But then what you had is a perfect social science experiment where all the institutions, all the legal constraints, all the enforcement were taken away. So one of the things I guess I would like to say is that you do need institutions and you do need enforcement of environmental processes. Under Lula, the deforestation dropped by 82%. I'm not making this up. Yes, there was leakage, but on the other hand, the deforestation rate really did slow. And there were new models of how to think about this. So, and this is a longer part of a story, but the point is that you can be surprised by the rate of change. Now, what we know is we're in a great acceleration, and deforestation and all the other things we've been talking about are driving this very strongly. But I would like to emphasize a couple of things about the ways one might think about things, because at least in the same sense that you have a lot of deforestation, we are also seeing globally a lot of forest transitions. And what do I mean by that? Forest recovery of various kinds, partly because people have moved from those forests, or they receive remittances and aren't required to do agriculture. There's a number of things that transpire. But the point here is that you can see the importance of natural regeneration as well as managed agroforestries. And remember that about 30 to 40% of the global population is forest dependent. So in that sense, perhaps rethinking what self-interest might be in terms of forests is important. The problem is that these are complex, irascible, don't lend themselves to modernist ideologies of uniformity and simplistic management. The second thing is that globalization can be your friend. I'm thinking here of acai, and I'm sure as a member of Enlightened Self-Interest, you will go out immediately and buy a bowl of acai. It's produced by small farmers, long tradition, Amazonian domesticate of 8,000 years, high in antioxidant. And because it's Fashion Week, it's a very fashionable thing to eat. Anyway, the point is that this dynamic of the global as well as national demands for acai has pushed this thing into a new kind of model, of bioeconomies that has a much more social justice. It's actually resulting in the conversion of what had been pasture lands into these complex forests, and it depends greatly on local knowledge. So that's sort of one arena in which these kinds of things can be, these kinds of things can move. The other thing is, perhaps you've noticed, because Amazonia is in the news every week, for a long time we were relegated into, some kind of world of, isn't that folkloric that she studies Amazonia? But the point is that there's huge amounts of indigenous activism. Last year, the Amazon Assessment Report came out. I was one of it's like an IPCC report. And every one of those scientists, and these were geologists, ecologists, social scientists, anthropologists, but also very many hard science and climate science people, said, you know what? We don't have a clue how to manage this. Indigenous knowledge and indigenous activism is really what we need if this is going to stay in place. So one of the things is a little bit of what we might call a kind of change in mentality about not thinking that our science is the only form of science that can manage these systems, and also perhaps being a little humble rather than cutting these complex systems down to grow one species, rather thinking that, well, we don't maybe know, but other people do. So that's a kind of question of different kinds of epistemologies coming into place. And the other thing also, which that was a big point, and it all sort of, you would think these hard climate scientists and carbon jockeys and everything would say, well, what we need is, I don't know, a silver bullet somewhere, as you point out. But in fact, what they kept saying is, first of all, the best protection of these lands is through indigenous people, and they are forest guardians, and this is a global thing. That is, right now, most of the biodiversity in the world and much of the tropics are being protected by a large amount of indigenous activism. And in a certain sense, indigenous has a little pejorative thing. We might think of them as complex ethnic groups and new forms of civilization that have evolved in concert with global pressures, a lot of violence, as well as their own thoughts and ways of being. And they're not unmodern. I'm getting to my end here. The other thing that I would also suggest is that there's another set of changes that have to do with ontologies. And what that means is about ways of being in the world, ways of approaching the world. And you can see sort of changes if these constitutions that go, we have to inscribe the rights of nature, the Pachamama, into our constitutions. That's a shift to an indigenous ontology. That mountains, rivers, and even Pablo Escobar's hippos are now having rights, and trees appear to have standing. We're in a kind of slow-mo, it could go faster, but there is an ontological shift, at least in the realm of legal framing. So what does this get us to? Your points. It gets us to the Latin American and Amazonian idea of a pluriverse. That is, you don't need just one model in which to survive in the world. And remember, even though we're talking about an average of 1.5 that we don't want to go over, many places are already living in the future and have gone over. So it's important to realize that. But even getting any incremental thing isn't like it doesn't count. It's important even if it isn't perfection. So I guess what I would argue is this blended solutions, which is also the way that indigenous people in Amazonia would argue, and other kinds of traditional peoples of many different sorts, which is that there's lots of different ways of dealing with environment and history and the future. But there's not just one path, and that it's for this reason that pluriverses are now increasingly part of the narrative of regional development in Amazonia. And the body painting is so fashionable. It's really good.
Thank you, Susanna. I'm really sorry you've been patiently waiting, but maybe after 7 o'clock you could catch some of us and ask a question, because we really need to kind of move. I just want to close out by saying thanks to all of you for having come through and kind of patiently listen to us, listening to our kind of very, very unique kind of takes. What I'd like to now have is ask Dean Arantxa for a few words.
So it's not very often that I get the chance to speak from this side of the auditorium, and I love it. I first wanted to thank you. You were meant to be the task force that my predecessor Enrico put together to put new ideas on the table, to disrupt, to bring different voices to the table. And this is exactly what I've been hearing while I was backbenching here. And I think this is the value of this exercise that you should try to squeeze out of them before they go back home. I just want to say three things. First, I just came back from Geneva. I was there this morning. We had a long conversation about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which is one of the many mechanisms we have to look at to avoid carbon leakage, to make sure that what one does not translate into pollution somewhere else. But my sense, and it's all very tough, and it's all very difficult, and it requires a humongous effort, but the reality is that it is doable. So let's start from the point of view that this is doable. Second thing I wanted to say is that we are living in an incredibly conflictual international space. But if there is something that unites all the citizens of all these countries that are a conflict, is that they will all sink under climate change. So we have to make this very rivalry-driven world into an opportunity for a common cause on climate change. And the third thing I would want to leave you with is beyond good efforts and beyond individual efforts or collective efforts, we need systems change. We need systems to be in place that helps us anchor these efforts, and that helps us monitor, and that helps us also make transparent what has not yet been done. Thank you again for coming from very far, lending yourselves to this exercise of disrupting, and thank you for helping us disrupt. Channel your views through them so that through them we channel our collective views to the G20 that will be meeting in Bali soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arancha. Thank you.